Aircraft production statistics proved even more lopsided and alarming. Germany produced approximately 15,596 military aircraft in 1942, according to the US Strategic Bombing Survey's analysis of captured German records. This figure represented a significant increase from previous years, and German leadership celebrated it as proof of industrial strength and mobilization success. The Luftwaffe was being equipped with modern fighters and bombers in substantial numbers, but American production in 1942 reached 47,836 aircraft, more than 3 times German output. When German intelligence officers first encountered these figures, they assumed they were propaganda or included training aircraft, gliders, and non-combat types. But analysis proved the figures represented combat aircraft comparable to German types. In 1943, the disparity widened further. American production reached 85,898 aircraft, while German production, despite intense efforts to increase output, reached approximately 20,600 planes. The Americans were building more than 4 aircraft for every 1 Germany produced. In 1944, American production would reach 96,318 aircraft, while German production peaked at approximately 3,987 planes before declining under the impact of Allied bombing. By war's end, the United States would produce approximately 300,317 military aircraft total, a figure that exceeded even Roosevelt's ambitious 1940 projections. The sky belonged to the Allies, not because of pilot skill or aircraft quality, though both mattered, but because American factories could build planes faster than German pilots could shoot them down, and faster than German factories could replace losses. But perhaps the most devastating comparison involved merchant shipping, because it directly addressed what German naval strategy depended upon. Germany understood that logistics in a global war depended fundamentally on maritime transportation. The Atlantic Ocean was the crucial battleground where U-boats sought to sever supply lines between America and Britain. If Germany could sink ships faster than they could be built, Allied logistics would collapse. Britain would be starved into submission, and American material superiority would be irrelevant because it could not reach the fighting fronts. The U-boat campaign was Germany's answer to American industrial capacity. Destroy the ships and production numbers become meaningless. Germany tracked Allied shipping losses meticulously. In 1942, German U-boat achieved their greatest success, sinking 1322 Allied ships totaling 6.3 million tons. This seemed like devastating success, the highest annual total of the war. Surely the Allies could not sustain such losses indefinitely. The Battle of the Atlantic appeared to be tilting toward Germany. U-boat commanders were celebrated as heroes, their successes prominently featured in German propaganda. Admiral Karl Dönitz, commander of the U-boat fleet, confidently predicted that sustained sinking rates would force Allied surrender before American industrial production could become decisive. Yet, despite these massive losses, Allied shipping capacity increased throughout 1942. How was this possible? The answer lay in American shipbuilding capacity that defied all German understanding of industrial production. The captured documents and intelligence reports included increasing references to Liberty ships, a standardized cargo vessel design that American shipyards were producing at extraordinary rates. Initially, German intelligence dismissed reports of Liberty ship production rates as obvious propaganda, too absurd to credit. The claim stated that American shipyards were building these 10,000-ton cargo ships in an average of 42 days from key laying to launch. Some were reportedly built in less than 2 weeks. This was impossible according to everything German naval architects understood about shipbuilding. Ship construction was a slow, methodical process taking months or years. The M4 Sherman alone was produced at 11 different facilities operated by automotive companies like Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, and agricultural equipment manufacturers like Allis-Chalmers, and locomotive builders like Baldwin and Limmer. These companies had no previous tank building experience but applied their existing manufacturing expertise. Mass production techniques from automotive plants, heavy machinery fabrication from agricultural equipment makers, large-scale welding and metalworking from locomotive builders to military manufacturing with devastating effectiveness. This distributed production model provided resilience that German centralized production could not match. If one Sherman production facility was bombed or experienced problems, 10 others continued production. Total production barely fluctuated. Germany, with more centralized production, was more vulnerable to disruption. A single successful bombing raid on a critical facility could significantly impact national production. The decentralized American model was not just more productive, but also more resilient, harder to disrupt, and capable of rapid expansion by bringing additional facilities online. Artillery production followed similar patterns of overwhelming American superiority. Germany produced approximately 11,000 artillery pieces of all types in 1943. Howitzers, field guns, anti-tank guns, anti-aircraft guns, representing the maximum output German industry could sustain. This figure included production from German factories in occupied territories. Every facility that could be mobilized for artillery production. America produced approximately 43,000 artillery pieces in the same year, nearly 4 times German output, while simultaneously supplying Britain, the Soviet Union, and other allies with thousands more pieces through Lend-Lease programs, ACE programs. German forces in combat noted that American artillery support was overwhelming, not because of any technical superiority. German artillery pieces were often superior in design, but simply due to volume. American artillery units fired support missions that consumed more ammunition in hours than German units received in weeks. This was not tactical excellence or better fire control. It was industrial capacity translated directly to battlefield firepower. Modern military operationally significant comparison between American and German industrial capacity. Modern military operations require transportation. Armies move on wheels and rails be transported from ports or railheads to fighting units. Wounded must be evacuated. Troops must be moved to threatened sectors. Artillery must be positioned and repositioned. In short, military effectiveness in modern warfare depends fundamentally on logistics mobility, and logistics mobility depends on motor vehicles. The Wehrmacht remained partially horse-drawn throughout the entire war, with hundreds of thousands of horses providing transportation for artillery supplies and equipment. This was not a romantic attachment to traditional methods or cultural preference for horses. It was simple lack of sufficient motor vehicles. Germany produced approximately 100,000 trucks in 1943, a figure that had to serve both military and essential civilian needs. The Wehrmacht never achieved complete motorization. Infantry divisions typically had their artillery and heavy equipment horse-drawn. Supply columns relied heavily on horse-drawn wagons. Only elite formations like panzer divisions were fully motorized, and even these often experienced vehicle shortages. America produced approximately 620,000 trucks in 1943, almost all for military use. American Lend-Lease programs delivered 427,284 trucks to the Soviet Union alone during the entire war, more than Germany's total truck production for all purposes during the entire conflict. Every American infantry division had more organic transport capacity than a German panzer division. Some captured documents referenced fuel being used for heating buildings, running electrical generators for non-essential purposes, and fueling vehicles for recreational trips. The waste of fuel for purposes German forces would consider criminally negligent was routine in American operations. During the Battle of the Bulge, German planning explicitly depended on capturing American fuel depots because the Wehrmacht could not supply sufficient fuel for the offensive through its own logistics. This dependency on capturing enemy supplies was itself an admission of German logistical weakness and strategic desperation. Steel production statistics underlined every other production comparison because steel is the foundation of industrial warfare. Weapons, vehicles, ships, infrastructure tools all require steel. Military production in an industrial war is fundamentally constrained by steel availability. Germany produced approximately 30 million tons of steel in 1943, representing maximum output from German industrial capacity plus captured European steel production. This figure included output from occupied French, Belgian, and Czech steel mills operating under German direction. It represented total mobilization of every available steel-producing facility. The United States produced 81 million tons of steel in 1943. America produced nearly 3 tons of steel for every 1 ton Germany produced. The Soviet Union, despite massive industrial evacuation and German destruction of Western industrial areas, still produced approximately 18 million tons. Combined Allied steel production approached 150 million tons versus German output of 30 million tons, a 5-1 advantage that translated directly to weapons production. More steel meant more tanks, more ships, more artillery, more trucks, more aircraft, more ammunition, more of everything required for industrial warfare. The steel production gap was not something that could be overcome through better tactics, superior training, or ideological commitment. It was a fundamental resource constraint that determined the maximum possible military production. Germany was fighting a 5-front war: Western Europe, Eastern Front, Italy, air war over Germany, Atlantic Ocean, with 1/5 the steel production of its combined enemies. The mathematics of defeat were written in steel production figures. Colonel Galen and Colonel von Rona spent weeks during late 1943 analyzing these figures with increasing desperation, cross-referencing sources, searching for errors or exaggerations that might make the picture less catastrophic. They found none. Every source confirmed the same basic reality. They brought in other analysts from both Foreign Armies East and Foreign Armies West, showed them the data, asked for independent assessments. The conclusions were always the same. America possessed industrial capacity that made German production look like cottage industry. The Soviet Union, despite massive losses and German occupation of significant industrial territory, had successfully evacuated and rebuilt industrial capacity that exceeded German output. Britain, though smaller in absolute terms, maintained production sufficient to supply a modern army, while also providing advanced technologies like radar, jet engines, and cobra-braking machinery that Germany struggled to match. Germany faced 3 major opponents, each of which had greater industrial capacity than Germany in at least some categories. Combined Allied production advantage was overwhelming across every category of military equipment. The only question was how long German tactical superiority and defensive advantages could delay inevitable defeat. The analysts prepared a comprehensive report for the German High Command in December 1943. The report was clinical, mathematical, undeniable in its logic. He cited historical examples of smaller forces defeating larger ones through skill and determination. Frederick the Great's victories when outnumbered, Hannibal's victories over Rome, Napoleon's early campaigns. He insisted that Allied production figures were exaggerated for propaganda purposes, that American equipment was inferior and would fail in combat, that Soviet industry would collapse under continued German pressure, that Britain was near economic exhaustion. Other commanders and Nazi leadership figures reacted similarly. They pointed to continuing German tactical victories to superior German weapons like the Panther tank and the M162 jet fighter, to the defensive advantages of fortified positions. They argued that German troops were better trained, better led, more ideologically motivated than Allied forces. They believed that tactical excellence could overcome numerical disadvantage. Some argued that secret weapons under development, jet aircraft, improved U-boats, would change the strategic. Von Rona attempted to explain that tactics became irrelevant against overwhelming material superiority. That quality differences disappeared when facing 5 times as many enemies. That even the best troops could not fight effectively without fuel, ammunition, and replacement equipment. His arguments were dismissed as defeatism. The report was filed and ignored. The German High Command's rejection of these intelligence assessments represented a fundamental failure to understand how modern industrial warfare worked. Military traditions from previous centuries emphasized courage, skill, leadership, tactical brilliance as the decisive factors in warfare. These qualities had won wars for thousands of years. Individual warriors with superior training could defeat larger numbers of inferior opponents. Superior tactics could overcome numerical disadvantages. Brilliant commanders could achieve victory through maneuver and deception. But World War II was different from all previous conflicts. It was the first truly industrial total war where victory depended more on factory output than battlefield prowess. The nation that could produce more tanks, planes, guns, ammunition and supplies would win through simple attrition, regardless of tactical consideration. Germany's military leadership, trained in traditional Prussian military methods, could not psychologically accept this new reality. But some German officers did understand. General Heinz Guderian, one of Germany's greatest tank commanders and theorists of armoured warfare, wrote in his memoirs about studying captured American equipment and supply documents. He concluded that Germany was fighting an enemy with unlimited industrial resources and that victory was impossible under these circumstances. Field Marshal Win RML reached similar conclusions after fighting British and American forces in North Africa, Italy, and France. He noted in letters to his wife and in official reports that German tactical superiority meant nothing against enemies, who could replace losses immediately, while German units fought with steadily dwindling resources. In 1944, he would be driven to participation in the plot against Hitler, partly from this recognition that the war could not be won militarily. Albert Speer, appointed Reich Minister of Armaments and War Production in February 1942, understood the production gap and worked frantically to increase German output. He achieved significant increases through rationalization of production, better resource allocation, and ruthless exploitation of slave labor. German production increased substantially under his direction. 1943 and 1944 saw peak German output in most categories. But Speer knew his efforts were insufficient. After Allied bombing of synthetic oil facilities began in May 1944, Speer concluded the war was economically lost. The May 12, 1944 bombing of the Lohne synthetic oil plant was, in Speer's later words, the day the technological war was decided. He would later state, "On that day, it was clear to everyone in German industry that they had lost the war." Yet he continued demanding production increases, making speeches about secret weapons and ultimate victory. Because his worldview and position left no alternative, the intelligence analysts continued their work throughout 1944, even as their reports were systematically dismissed or ignored. They documented the Allied invasion of Normandy on June 6, 1944 with the same mathematical precision they had applied to production statistics. The landing involved approximately 5,000 ships carrying 156,000 troops in the first day, followed by millions more in subsequent months. The logistical planning and execution involved in such an operation exceeded anything Germany had attempted even at the peak of its power. The artificial Mulberry harbours deployed to support the invasion, temporary harbours built in Britain, towed across the English Channel and assembled off the Normandy coast, represented engineering and industrial capacity that German forces could not match. Each Mulberry harbour was roughly the size of Dover Harbour, Britain's major port, but built specifically for this invasion and considered expendable. Within weeks of the landing, Allied forces were receiving supplies through these artificial harbours at rates that would have sustained the entire Wehrmacht. Supply depots established in Normandy contained more material than existed in all of Germany. Photographic reconnaissance showed fuel dumps, ammunition stockpiles, vehicle parks, supply warehouses covering square miles. Allied logistics operated at scales that made German supply operations look primitive. American combat units consumed supplies at rates German forces could not imagine sustaining. Artillery-fired support missions measured in thousands of rounds per day. Infantry units were resupplied daily with fresh food, ammunition, replacement equipment. Vehicle maintenance was supported by mobile repair facilities carrying enormous inventories of spare parts. Medical care included frontline surgical hospitals equipped with supplies and equipment better than most civilian hospitals in Germany. The intelligence services documented American air operations in Europe with similar precision. By late 1944, American and British air forces were flying thousands of sorties daily, dropping thousands of tons of bombs, losing hundreds of aircraft to flak and fighters, and replacing those losses immediately. The 8th Air Force, operating from Britain alone, had more aircraft than the entire Luftwaffe. A single American bomb group roughly equivalent to a German Gotha had more aircraft than some German Fleerkorps. German aircraft production, despite Schurier's desperate efforts, peaked at approximately 3,987 aircraft in 1944 before declining sharply under the combined effects of Allied bombing, fuel shortages, and resource constraints. American production in 1944 reached 96,318 aircraft. The Americans were building more than 2 aircraft for every one Germany produced, and American aircraft were increasingly sophisticated. Long-range fighters like the P-51 Mustang, heavy bombers like the B-17 and B-24, and specialized aircraft for every role. The sky belonged to the Allies by 1944 because American factories could build planes faster than German pilots and flak guns could shoot them down. The Luftwaffe was dying through attrition, losing experienced pilots who could not be replaced, burning fuel that could not be replenished, flying aircraft that were outnumbered by factors of 5 to 1 or higher. German jet aircraft like the Mi-262 represented technological superiority, but Germany produced only about 1,400 M262s total. They were outnumbered by thousands of Allied conventional fighters and could not change the strategic balance. Quality became irrelevant against overwhelming quantity. The final devastating intelligence came in late 1944 through detailed analysis of Allied logistics operations in France. After the Normandy breakout in late July and August, American forces advanced rapidly across France, liberating Paris, pushing toward the German border. For a brief period in late August and early September, American forces outran their supply lines. Supply trucks were traveling hundreds of miles from Normandy beaches to advancing units, consuming enormous amounts of fuel just for the journey. This should have created opportunities for German counterattacks against overextended Allied forces with vulnerable supply lines. Instead, the Americans simply flew supplies forward. The intelligence reports documented that American forces were receiving supplies by air in quantities that exceeded what German ground forces could transport by truck and rail combined. Thousands of C-47 transport aircraft flying multiple missions daily delivered fuel, ammunition, and food to advancing armies. During the period when ground supply was constrained, American transport aircraft delivered thousands of tons of supplies daily. This air supply capability alone exceeded Germany's entire logistics capacity. The analysis was devastating. America had so much transport capacity that they used aircraft, expensive, complex, resource-intensive aircraft, to deliver routine supplies simply because it was faster than ground transport. Germany could barely supply frontline units by truck and train. America was using aircraft for routine logistics. One particular example documented by intelligence analysts illustrated the disparity with painful clarity. General George Patton's Third Army advanced so rapidly in August 1944 that ground supply lines could not keep pace. The army temporarily halted due to fuel shortages in early September, demonstrating that even American logistics had physical limits, but the halt lasted only days. Emergency air supply operations delivered sufficient fuel to resume the advance within 72 hours. German intelligence calculated that the tonnage flown to Third Army in 1 week exceeded what the entire WWII could have transported in a month, even at full strength, with unlimited fuel. And the Luftwaffe in September 1944 had neither full strength nor unlimited fuel. It had a fraction of its former capacity, operating with fuel rationing, losing aircraft faster than they could be replaced. By late 1944, the intelligence services were documenting not just American superiority, but the immediate implications of that superiority for Germany's survival. Soviet forces were advancing from the east with massive numerical advantages in tanks, artillery, and aircraft. Soviet industrial production had recovered from initial German advances and was being supplemented by enormous American Lend-Lease shipments. 400,000 trucks, 12,000 armored vehicles, 11,000 aircrafts, enormous quantities of food, fuel, raw materials. British and American forces advanced from the west with complete air superiority and overwhelming logistic support. German forces still fought skillfully, still conducted tactical masterpieces, still extracted heavy casualties from attacking forces, but the strategic outcome was never in doubt. The numbers made defeat inevitable. The Ardennes offensive in December 1944, Germany's last major attack in the West, demonstrated the futility of fighting against such industrial superiority. German forces achieved complete surprise through careful security and radio silence. They achieved initial tactical success, driving through American lines, capturing territory, causing panic in Allied rear areas. The offensive advanced significantly in the first days, seeming to validate Hitler's faith in willpower and tactical skill. But the offensive was doomed before it began. Not by any failure of planning or execution, but by simple logistics mathematics. German plans explicitly depended on capturing American fuel depots to sustain the attack. The Wehrmacht could not supply sufficient fuel through its own logistics system for an offensive of this scale and duration. Hitler himself stated that German forces would have to rely on capturing Allied dumps during their push westward. Kampfgruppe Piper, the spearhead armoured formation, specifically targeted American fuel depots coming within 1,000 ft of a major storage facility at Stavelot before American forces set it ablaze. This dependency on capturing enemy supplies was itself admission of German logistical weakness and strategic desperation. No successful military operation should depend on seizing enemy resources to continue. That the German High Command approved such a plan demonstrated how divorced from reality their strategic thinking had become. When American forces recovered from an initial surprise and brought their material superiority to bear, the German offensive collapsed within weeks. American units that suffered heavy initial losses were reinforced and resupplied within days. The 101st Airborne Division surrounded at Bastogne was sustained by air supply, while American armored forces fought through to relieve them. German forces that initially advanced rapidly found themselves immobilized by fuel shortages under constant air attack. When weather cleared, facing enemy reinforcements arriving faster than German commanders thought possible. The offensive consumed Germany's last operational reserves of fuel, armor, and experienced troops for no strategic gain whatsoever. Intelligence analysis of the Ardennes operation confirmed earlier assessments with brutal clarity. American forces lost heavily in the initial fighting. Approximately 19,000 killed, 47,500 wounded, 23,000 captured or missing. But these losses were replaced within weeks. Within a month, American forces were stronger than before the offensive began. German losses were proportionally smaller. Approximately 12,000 killed, 38,000 wounded, 30,000 captured or missing, but irreplaceable. Germany had no strategic reserves. The experienced troops lost in the Ardennes could not be replaced. The panzers destroyed could not be rebuilt. The fuel consumed was gone. The battle demonstrated in microcosm what intelligence analysts had been documenting for years. German tactical skill and initial success meant nothing against enemies who could absorb losses and continue fighting with undanish strength, while German strength declined inexorably. Colonel Alexis von Rohr did not live to see Germany's final defeat. He was arrested in July 1944 for peripheral connections to the July 20th plot against Hitler. Though his involvement was minor, he knew of the conspiracy but did not actively participate. The Nazi regime executed him on October 12, 1944, at Plötzensee prison. His death removed one of Germany's most accurate intelligences, a man who had tried repeatedly to provide objective assessment of enemy capabilities to inform strategic decisions. Historians would later discover that von Rohr had been secretly anti-Nazi for years and had deliberately passed deceptive Allied intelligence about D-Day preparations to Hitler, making him an unwitting Allied asset while ostensibly serving German intelligence. His execution was both personally tragic and professionally symbolic. Nazi Germany literally killed the messenger for bringing unwelcome truths. Colonel Galen survived the war. In the final months, he organized the preservation of foreign armies' East files, microfilming documents, and hiding them in the Bavarian Alps. After German surrender, he contacted American forces, intelligence files, and expertise. The Americans, recognizing the value of his knowledge about Soviet forces as the Cold War began, employed him. He would later lead West German intelligence services, his analytical capabilities recognized even by former enemies. Their tragedy was not analytical failure, but the irrelevance of accurate intelligence when leadership refuses to accept reality. The captured supply documents told a story of inevitable defeat written in numbers that could not be argued with or dismissed except through willful blindness. They showed American abundance that seemed impossible according to German experience, but was verified through multiple independent sources. They revealed an enemy with such overwhelming industrial capacity that German hopes of military victory were fantasies disconnected from material reality. The only question remaining by late 1943 was how long Germany would deny what the numbers made clear. How many more would die before arithmetic replaced ideology as the basis for strategic decisions? That question was answered on May 7, 1945, when Germany surrendered unconditionally, defeated not primarily by military force, but by the mathematical certainty that industrial capacity determines victory in modern war. The intelligence analysts who first studied those captured supply documents in late 1943 had understood this truth. 18 months earlier, they had tried to warn their leadership. They had presented the evidence. They had shown the mathematics. Their warnings were ignored. And millions paid the price for that willful blindness. The captured American supply charts documented not just military logistics, but the futility of fighting against overwhelming industrial superiority. The numbers told a truth that German leadership could not accept. In modern industrial warfare, factories matter more than courage. Production lines determine outcomes more than tactics, and arithmetic always wins in the give-give.